The apartment always smelled faintly of cedar and old books, the way it had since the day Alex moved in 4 years earlier. In the late October light that slanted through the tall windows of their third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn, everything looked softer than it felt. Jordan was at the stove, sleeves rolled to the elbow, flipping pancakes with the absent grace of someone who'd been feeding people since middle school. He wore the faded green Dartmouth hoodie he refused to retire, even though the drawstring had vanished years ago and the cuffs were frayed to threads. Alex sat at the small table, pretending to read yesterday's Times, but really he was watching the way Jordan's shoulders moved under cotton, the way the morning sun caught the fine gold hair on his forearms. 4 years of pretending. For years of perfecting the half-second delay before looking up, the exact decibel of a neutral morning, the art of never lingering too long in any shared space. Jordan Hayes, 31, senior project manager at a clean energy nonprofit. Straight as a Midwestern highway, and so kind it felt like a personal attack. Coffee's fresh, Jordan said without turning around. His voice had that low, unhurried register that made strangers on the subway trust him with their life stories. Figured you'd be up all night again. Alex made a non-committal noise that could have meant anything. He had been up all night finishing a translation of a Chilean poet no one would read, but that wasn't why his eyes burned. It was because Jordan had brought someone home last night, a woman named Claire with a laugh like wind chimes. Alex had lain in the dark listening to the muffled sounds through the wall, counting heartbeats until the front door finally clicked shut at 1:47. M. Jordan slid a plate across the table, 2 pancakes, a pat of butter already melting into the craters. Exactly the way Alex secretly liked them, even though he always insisted he didn't care. Jordan remembered everything. He remembered that Alex hated cilantro, that Alex's mother called every Sunday at 4, that Alex once said offhand drunkenly to Thanksgivings ago that he thought the northern lights must look like hope made visible. Jordan had filed it away the way other people bookmarked recipes. "You're quiet this morning," Jordan said, sitting opposite him with his own plate. He cut his pancakes into precise squares. "Everything okay?" Alex's pulse thudded in his ears. "Just tired." Jordan studied him for a moment, dark eyes gentle. "There's that reading tonight at Housing Works, the one your press is doing. You going?" Of course, Jordan knew about the reading. He probably had it in his calendar with a little reminder. Alex had mentioned it once, weeks ago, in the same tone people used to mention dental appointments. "I don't know," Alex lied. He was the featured translator. His name was on the poster. "You should," Jordan said. "Your work's good, Alex. People should hear it." Your work's good. As if that was the part that mattered. As if Jordan hadn't once fallen asleep on the couch with his head in Alex's lap during a documentary about penguins, breathing slow and trusting against Alex's thigh. As if Jordan hadn't texted him from Tokyo at 3 a.m., his time too. P.M. Alex is just to say he'd found a bookstore. That stocked Alex's last translation, and had taken a photo of it on the shelf like a proud parent. Alex managed to shrug. Maybe. Jordan let it go, because Jordan always let things go when Alex wished he wouldn't. The day unspooled the way their days did. Jordan left for work in his navy peacoat, calling goodbye over his shoulder. Alex stayed behind in the quiet apartment that still smelled like maple syrup and Jordan's cedar soap. He answered emails, revised a stanza that refused to behave, and tried not to think about how many times he'd imagined telling Jordan the truth, and how every version ended the same way with Jordan moving out, with the easy warmth replaced by careful distance, with the apartment turning into a place Alex couldn't stand to live anymore. He went to the reading. Of course he did. He stood at the podium under 2 bright lights and read his translations in a voice that shook only slightly. Afterward, people told him the poems were beautiful, haunting, precise. Someone asked if the longing in the final piece was intentional. Alex said yes, because it was easier than the truth. He took the long way home, walking through Washington Square Park even though it was cold. When he finally let himself into the apartment, all the lights were off, except the one over the stove. Jordan's coat was draped over the back of the couch, still holding the shape of his body. There was a note on the counter in Jordan's handwriting, neat and looping. Took the leftovers to the office for lunch tomorrow. There's soup in the fridge, carrot ginger? No cilantro, I checked. You were great tonight. I was in the back. Didn't want to make you nervous. J. Alex stood there for a long time, note in hand, heart ricocheting against his ribs. He hadn't seen Jordan in the audience. Hadn't felt those dark eyes on him even once. He heated the soup because he was starving and because Jordan had made it for him. He ate it standing at the counter, reading the note again and again until the words blurred. Later, he lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of Jordan moving through his nighttime routine bathroom door. Toothbrush, the soft thud of his bedroom door. Alex stared at the ceiling and tried to calculate how many more years he could survive like this. The ache had become structural, load-bearing. Remove it, and everything collapsed. He must have fallen asleep, because the next thing he knew, the apartment was perfectly dark, and there was weight at the foot of his bed. Not heavy, just present. He froze, breath caught somewhere behind his sternum. A blanket. The heavy wool one from the living room that smelled faintly of Jordan's detergent and the cedar closet where they stored winter things. Jordan must have crept in. Seeing that Alex had kicked off his own comforter again, he always did, no matter the season, and covered him without waking him, Alex lay very still until he heard Jordan's door close down the hall. Then he pulled the blanket higher, pressing his face into the weave of it, breathing Jordan in until his lungs hurt. For years of careful distance, and Jordan kept crossing it in small, unbearable ways. Pancakes cut just so, soup without cilantro. A blanket placed with impossible gentleness on a sleeping man who would never be brave enough to deserve it. Alex turned his face into the pillow so the sound he made would be muffled. He didn't cry often. When he did, it was quiet and efficient. The way he did everything else. In the morning, the blanket would be folded neatly on the couch again. Jordan would offer coffee and ask about his day, and Alex would pretend his entire world hadn't quietly rearranged itself around the weight of one. More kindness he couldn't repay. Some loves, Alex thought, pressing his wet face into wool that didn't belong to him, are patient enough to outlast the people who carry them. He slept eventually, cocooned in borrowed warmth, dreaming of northern lights he would never see with the only person he wanted beside him. The next 3 days fell into the same suspended rhythm. Like a song stuck on the same four aching bars, Day One Elias came home late from the studio. Paint still under his fingernails, the faint smell of turpentine clinging to his hoodie. He found the apartment dark except for the soft light spilling from the kitchen. Theo was at the counter, sleeves rolled high, stirring something that smelled like garlic and forgiveness. On the back of the couch lay the charcoal scarf Elias had once. Drunkenly said looked stupidly beautiful on Theo during a snowstorm last January. Elias had thought Theo hadn't heard him over the wind. The scarf was folded with deliberate care. The way Theo folded everything, like he was afraid of bruising the fabric. A small white card poked out from the fringe. For the nights you forget to take care of yourself. Telia stood in the doorway longer than necessary, pulse thudding in his ears. He picked up the scarf, pressed it once, quickly. To his face, the way a guilty man might press a hand to a Bible, it smelled like Theo's detergent and the cedar candle Theo burned when he couldn't sleep. Elias wore it the next morning, even though the forecast said 52 degrees and sunny. He told himself it was just practical. His throat had been scratchy. When Theo shuffled out of his room at noon, hair sticking up like a dandelion gone to seed, he stopped in the hallway. His eyes went straight to the scarf, then to Elias's face, then away, as if the sight burned. "Morning," Theo mumbled. "Morning," Elias answered. Voice cracking like a 13-year-old's, Theo's fingers twitched at his side, then rose hesitant, almost apologetic, and brushed the knot Elias had fumbled at his throat. 1 second, maybe 2. Enough for Elias to feel the small callus on Theo's index finger from holding brushes too tightly. "Looks better on you," Theo said, so quietly Elias almost missed it. Then he retreated to the coffee maker, like nothing had happened. Day 2 the rain came down in sheets, turning the city into watercolor. Elias had a critique at 4. He left early to avoid Theo, because avoidance had always been his most refined skill. When he came back soaked and shaking, there was a dry towel warmed in the dryer waiting on his desk chair, and next to it, the navy sweater Theo had worn exactly once and declared too pretentious. Elias laughed, a short, wounded sound, and put it on anyway. The sleeves were half an inch too long. He had to push them up the way Theo always did. He spent the rest of the night painting, sleeves rolled, sweater streaked with cadmium red and cerulean, like he was trying to leave evidence. Theo got home after midnight from his bar shift. He paused in the doorway of the studio, taking in the sweater, the paint, the way Elias hadn't turned on the overhead light. Just the small lamp that painted everything gold. "You're ruining it," Theo said. But there was no scolding in his voice. "It was already pretentious," Elias replied. Not looking up from the canvas, Theo exhaled something that might have been a laugh. He crossed the room, slow, like Elias was a deer that might bolt. When he reached him, he didn't speak. He just lifted the hem of the sweater where paint had soaked through and dabbed at it with a rag soaked in turpentine. Gentle, methodical. His knuckles brushed Elias's ribs once, twice. Elias stopped breathing entirely. "You're shaking," Theo whispered. "It's cold," Elias lied. Theo didn't call him on it. He just kept cleaning the paint, fingers steady, until the sweater was mostly saved and Elias's heart was mostly destroyed. Day 3 on, the third day, Elias woke up to an empty apartment and a note on the fridge. Had an early delivery. "There's coffee in the press. Don't wear the sweater to critique. You'll get ultramarine on Professor Lin, and she'll murder you." Under the note was the scarf again, neatly folded. And on top of the scarf lay the small silver ring Theo wore on his right hand, the one his grandmother had given him before she died. Theo never took it off. Never. Elias stared at it for a long time. Then he put it on his own thumb, where it spun loosely, too big, like a promise that didn't quite fit yet. He wore the sweater again anyway, paint stains and all, and the scarf. And the ring that caught the light every time he moved his hand. Theo came home at dusk. He stopped dead in the doorway, eyes moving from the ring to Ilias's face and back again. The silence stretched so thin it could have cut them both. Finally, Theo spoke, voice rough. I wasn't sure you meant it," Elias said. Theo crossed the room in 3 strides. He didn't ask for the ring back. Instead, he reached out, closed his hand around Elias's where the silver circled his thumb, and held it there. Warm, steady, terrifying. "I've been meaning it for months," Theo said. "Years, maybe." "I'm not great at saying it," Elias laughed, wet and trembling. "I'm not great at hearing it." Theo's thumb traced the ring, then the inside of Elise's wrist, then stopped. "We could get better at both." Outside, the rain had stopped. Inside, something that had been clenched for 3 years finally let go. Elias leaned forward until his forehead rested against Theo's. "I'm still wearing your clothes tomorrow," he warned. Theo's answering smile was small and crooked, and the most beautiful thing Elias had ever seen. "Good. I'm counting on it." The apartment on the 14th floor of the old brick warehouse turned loft smelled perpetually of turpentine and coffee. Elias had lived there for 4 years, long enough that the exposed pipes and the creaking freight elevator felt like extensions of his own body. He painted huge canvases that no one bought, taught 2 classes a week at the community college, and kept mostly to himself. Then Julian moved in next door. Julian was a sound engineer. Quiet in the hallways, polite when their mail got mixed up, the kind of neighbor you nodded at and forgot 2 seconds later. He wore black t-shirts and headphones around his neck like a stethoscope, and always smelled faintly of solder and cedar. For 6 months, their interactions were limited to, "Hey, and sorry about the bass at 2A.M." The occasional shared elevator ride in silence. Then one morning, Elias opened his door to find a paper cup of coffee on the mat. Outside his apartment, lid popped. 2 sugars already stirred in exactly the way he liked it. No note. Just the coffee. He stared at it for a long time, then carried it inside and drank it before it got cold. 2 days later, there was a new tube of cadmium red left beside his door. The expensive kind he never bought for himself. Again, no note. Elias told himself it was a friendly neighbor thing. Julian probably felt bad about the base. Or maybe he was just one of those people who did random acts of kindness the way other people. Doom scrolled, but the gifts kept coming. Small, precise, impossible to misinterpret as accidents. A roll of the Belgian linen Elias had once mentioned was impossible to find locally. A tiny tin of clove pastilles, because Elias had coughed in the hallway once. A worn paperback of Rilke's letters to a young poet with certain lines underlined in pencil. Elias began timing his exits. He told himself it was to thank Julian in person, but really he just wanted to watch the man's face when he realized Elias knew they never quite managed to meet at the door instead. They started running into each other in the shared spaces of the building. The rooftop where Elias sometimes stretched canvases, the basement laundry room that smelled of detergent and wet concrete, the narrow alley where the dumpsters lived. Julian began lingering. He'd ask about Elias's paintings without ever making it sound like small talk. He remembered the names of Elias's students. Once, when Elias came back from the corner store with a split bag of groceries, Julian silently took the heaviest bag and carried it up 14 flights without being asked. 1. Thursday night, the power went out in half the building. Elias lit candles and kept painting by their wobbly light. At 11:47, there was a soft knock. Julian stood in the hallway holding 2 beers and a battery lantern like a peace offering. "I thought you might want company," he said. "Or light. Or both." They sat on the floor because the couch was covered in drop cloths. Julian asked questions the way other people breathed, easily, constantly, as if silence made him nervous. He wanted to know why Elias always painted figures with their backs turned. He wanted to know if Elias had ever been in love with someone who didn't love him back. He wanted to know whether Elias believed art could fix anything that was actually broken. Elias answered more than he meant to. The candlelight made Julian's eyes look almost gold, and his voice low from years of listening through headphones. Felt like something Elias could lean into after that. The hallway between their doors shrank. Julian started appearing when Elias came back from teaching. Offering to carry the rolled canvases that didn't fit in the elevator. They cooked together once, Julian chopping onions with terrifying speed while Elias panicked over risotto. They watched old horror movies on Elias's ancient projector. Julian's knee just brushing Elias's on the couch, neither of them moving away. Julian's laughter came out startled, like he hadn't expected to enjoy himself. Elias began leaving things too. A mix CD? Yes, an actual CD. Because Julian still had a 2003 Toyota with a disc player full of songs that made. Elias think of city lights at 3 a.m., a tiny watercolor study of the view from the roof at sunset, a borrowed book returned with a pressed violet between the pages. 10 days after the power outage, Julian knocked in the late afternoon. He was wearing the same black t-shirt he always wore, but his hands were fidgeting at his sides. "There's this sound installation opening tomorrow night," he said. "At the old train depot? It's immersive headphones, the whole thing. I have an extra ticket. I thought maybe you'd want to come. With me, like, together?" Elias's heart tried to climb out of his throat. "You mean like a date?" Julian exhaled like he'd been holding the air for years. "Yeah," he said, "like a date. If that's, I've never, with a guy, I don't know if I'm doing this right, but I know I don't want to keep leaving paint on your doorstep like some weird art gnome. I want to take you out, properly if you want." Elias stared at him. All the months of careful distance, of pretending the coffee and the cadmium red and the violet meant nothing, collapsed like wet paper. He said, "The paint, the coffee, all of it. That was you trying to?" "I was terrified," Julian admitted. "I've spent 32 years thinking I had everything figured out. And then you smile at me in the hallway like I'm worth smiling at, and suddenly nothing makes sense anymore. But in a good way. In the way where I lie awake, listening to you move around on the other side of the wall, and wish I had the nerve to knock." Elias felt something inside his chest unhook and float upward. "I thought you were straight," he said, the words small and honest. I thought so too, Julian said. Turns out labels are useless when someone walks around looking like you do when you're concentrating on a painting. Or when you laugh at your own jokes. Or when you leave me flowers and books like it's nothing. Elias stepped forward. The hallway light flickered overhead. It's the same light that had watched months of almosts and not quites. I'm not easy, Elias warned softly. I'm messy, and I overthink everything, and half my clothes have paint on them permanently. Good, Julian said. I'm terrible at feelings, and I burn toast, and I've been carrying your coffee up 14 flights because the idea of talking to you made me stupid. Elias laughed, the sound surprising both of them. So, tomorrow, he said? The installation. You'll pick me up at 7? I'll be at your door at 7, Julian promised. And I'll bring coffee. But this time, I'll hand it to you while looking you in the eye like a functional adult. Elias reached out, brushed an invisible speck from Julian's t-shirt. You could kiss me now, he said. If you wanted. For practice. Julian's smile was slow, enormous, a little shaky. Yeah, he said. I really want. So he did. And somewhere down the hall, the freight elevator groaned like it approved. The air between them had weight, like the pause before thunder. Alex stood in the kitchen doorway, watching Jamie scroll through his phone at the counter, the late afternoon sun cutting across the floorboards in long golden bars. 3 years of living together, 3 years of Alex cataloging the small, ordinary miracles of Jamie's presence, the way he hummed off-key while making coffee, the soft huff of laughter when he thought no one was listening, and Alex had trained himself to want nothing more than that. To be the quiet constant in Jamie's life, safe, unthreatening, invisible. Jamie looked up. Their eyes caught and held, and something in Jamie's face flickered recognition, maybe, or decision. He set the phone down. I see you, Jamie said, voice low. I don't think I did before. Not really. Alex's heart stuttered, but he didn't move. Jamie crossed the small distance between them, slow enough that Alex could have stepped away. He didn't. Jamie reached out and laced their fingers together like it was the simplest thing in the world. Saturday arrived bright and crisp, the kind of October day that feels stolen from summer. They went to the little contemporary gallery downtown because Jamie had insisted. Alex had expected to feel awkward to men on what might have been a date, might have been nothing. But instead, everything felt sharpened. The brush of Jamie's sleeve when he held the door. The warmth radiating from his body as they stood, shoulder to shoulder in front of a massive canvas swirling with cobalt and rust. Jamie tilted his head toward the painting. This one's us, he murmured. Alex raised an eyebrow. Explain. Jamie's mouth curved, half shy. Look how the red and the blue never quite touch, but you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. Like they're vibrating against each other. Like they always belonged in the same space and just hadn't realized it yet. Alex swallowed. It should have sounded like gallery brochure nonsense. From Jamie, it sounded like confession. They wandered the city after that. No destination, just the rhythm of walking together. Jamie told stories Alex had never heard, how he used to hide in the public library after school because home felt too loud. How he'd once tried to teach himself guitar from YouTube and given up after breaking 3 strings in one afternoon. Alex gave back pieces he'd hoarded like pressed flowers. The year he spent convinced he was broken. Because desire felt like a foreign language. The way loving Jamie from a distance had become its own kind of home. By dusk, they ended up at the corner cafe with the mismatched chairs and the good lamplight. They ordered drinks neither of them wanted. Just to stay inside the soft amber bubble a little longer, Jamie traced the rim of his cup with one finger, not looking up. I need to say something, and I'm probably going to be terrible at it. Lex waited. I'm in love with you, Jamie said, the words careful and deliberate, like he was laying down something fragile. I think I have been for a long time, but I didn't have the right name for it. I kept thinking love was supposed to arrive like a lightning strike, dramatic and obvious, and this was quieter, deeper. I was scared if I looked directly at it, it would vanish. But I'm looking now.
Alex yells.
He finally met Alex's eyes. And I choose it. I choose you. If you still want to be chosen. Alex felt the floor tilt, then right itself. All the air he'd been holding for 3 years rushed out at once. "I've been in love with you so long I forgot there was another way to feel," he said. His voice cracked on the last word, but he didn't care. "I thought if I stayed still enough you'd never have to know, and I could keep you anyway." I was terrified of asking for more. Jamie's smile was small and tremulous, and the most beautiful thing Alex had ever seen. "Ask now. Be with me," Alex whispered. "Really be with me." Jamie leaned across the table and kissed him, soft and certain, tasting like coffee and possibility. 2 weeks later, Alex woke to the smell of coffee and the sight of Jamie perched on the edge of the bed in sweatpants, hair sticking up, looking about 19 and nervous. "Hi," Jamie said, offering a mug like a peace treaty. I did a thing, and I maybe should have talked to you first, but it happened fast, and I didn't want to hide it." Alex sat up, heart already racing. "What kind of thing?" "I told my parents." Jamie's words came out in a rush. "About us. I was at Sunday lunch and Mom kept asking why I've been smiling at my phone like an idiot, why I suddenly care what throw pillows we own, and I just told them that I'm with you, that I'm happy, that I'm he," gestured vaguely, cheeks pink. "Gay, bisexual, whatever the right word is when the person you love happens to be a man. I don't have it all figured out yet, but I know the part that matters." Alex's throat closed. This was the moment the world outside their apartment pressed in, the moment everything could fracture. How did they take it? He asked carefully. Jamie's eyes filled, sudden and bright. "Dad cried. The good kind. Said he always knew I was looking for something, and he's just glad I found it. Mom went full mom, started Googling whether we needed a bigger table for Thanksgiving, asked if you like her lasagna. Wanted to know if we'd been together the whole 3 years, and I was just too dumb to notice." He laughed, wet and shaky. "She says you have to come next Sunday. No excuses." Alex set the coffee on the nightstand with shaking hands. He reached for Jamie, pulled him down until they were tangled together under the blankets, noses brushing. "You told them?" he said, wonder threading his voice. "You told them about me." "I want them to know you," Jamie whispered against his mouth. "I want everyone to know you're the reason I finally feel like I'm standing in the right life." Alex kissed him then, slow and reverent, tasting salt where Jamie's tears had slipped free. Outside, the city carried on, traffic lights blinking, leaves skittering across sidewalks. Strangers passing without knowing a small universe had just realigned itself in a quiet bedroom on the 3rd floor of an old brick building. Inside, 2 men who had spent years orbiting each other finally allowed themselves to land. They stayed there a long time. Coffee cooling, sunlight shifting across the sheets, learning the new weight of a future that belonged to both of them. Below is a new full-length story inspired by the same emotional arc Slow Burn roommates, do-overs, the terror and beauty of stepping out of invisibility. One small gesture that changes everything. But with entirely different characters, setting, names, details, and texture, the apartment smelled perpetually of old books and instant RAM. It was a 3rd floor. Walk up in Montreal's Plateau neighborhood, with creaking hardwood floors and a radiator that hissed like an angry cat every November. For 2.5 years, Julian and Emile had shared the space in the kind of polite, parallel bit friendship that graduate students perfect. When they're too tired for anything deeper, Julian was finishing a master's in urban planning. Emile was writing a dissertation on 19th century Quebecois poetry that no one, including Emile some days, believed would ever be finished. They had met through a university housing ad. Julian needed someone quiet who paid rent on time. Emile needed somewhere cheaper than the moldy studio he'd been renting above a Dupanner. It worked. They nodded hello in the hallway, left passive-aggressive post-its about whose turn it was to buy toilet paper, and occasionally watched a Canadiens game together while pretending they weren't both falling asleep by the second period. Julian was gay and had never Said it out loud to anyone who currently lived. In the same city as him, his family was back in Rimouski. They loved him, but love in his house had always come with a silent clause. Don't make us talk about it. So he dated sparingly, discreetly, and always somewhere that required at least one metro transfer. Emile, as far as Julian could tell, was straight. Uncomplicatedly so. He talked about ex-girlfriends with affectionate nostalgia. Hung a faded photo of himself and a dark-haired girl at Osheaga 2019 above his desk. And once spent 45 minutes trying to explain to Julian why the Habs' power play was objectively tragic. And yet there were moments tiny, treacherous moments when Julian caught Emile looking at him a beat too long. When Emile handed him a coffee because the barista wrote, "Your name prettier than mine," when Emile fell asleep on the couch during a late-night study session and somehow ended up with his head on Julian's thigh like it was the most natural thing in the world. Julian cataloged these moments the way other people collected vinyl, privately, obsessively, and with the certainty they would never be played aloud. Then came the scarf. It was late January, the kind of cold that felt personal. Julian had been at the library until it closed, trudging home through snow that came down in sharp, determined diagonals. He let himself into the apartment, shivering so hard his teeth chattered audibly. Emile was at the kitchen table, surrounded by books and empty mugs. Wearing noise-canceling headphones and a look of scholarly despair, Julian kicked off his boots, hung up his coat, and found something new draped across the back of his desk chair, a charcoal gray wool scarf. Hand-knitted, soft as anything he'd ever touched. No note. Just the scarf, waiting for him like it belonged there. He knew immediately it was Emile's work. Emile's grandmother had taught him to knit when he was 12, and he did it when he was anxious, which was often. Julian had watched scarves and hats and even a very lopsided sweater appear over the years, always given away to siblings or cousins or the barista who spelled his name right. Never to Julian. He wrapped it around his neck, still cold from the walk, and felt something inside his rib cage crack neatly in half. The next morning, he wore it to campus. When he came home that evening, Emile was cooking spaghetti sauce from a jar. Because Emile's culinary ambition rarely survived past step 1, and he glanced up once, saw the scarf, and smiled like someone who'd been holding his breath for weeks. Nothing was said. Not then, but the scarf stayed. Julian wore it every day that winter. Even when the temperature climbed above freezing and people gave him odd looks on the metro, Emile's knitting needles appeared more often. Sometimes Julian would wake up on a Saturday and find Emile on the couch, headphones on, working on something new in the same charcoal gray. Spring arrived in fits and starts. The radiator finally stopped hissing. Dissertation deadlines loomed like storm clouds. One night in April, Julian came home after a 12-hour library siege to find Emile sitting on the living room floor surrounded by printed drafts of his chapter on Emile Nelligan. The irony of the name never escaped them. Emile looked like he hadn't slept in days. "I can't do this," Emile said without greeting. "I can't finish it. I'm going to fail. I'm going to be 30 and still a student and die alone in this apartment with you quietly judging my sauce choices." Julian laughed before he could stop himself. "I do judge your sauce choices. They're war crimes." Emile huffed, something that was almost a laugh, then rubbed both hands over his face. "I need air." They went up to the roof, a tar-gravel rectangle no one else seemed to know existed. The city was loud and glittering below them, just starting to turn green. Emile brought a bottle of cheap red wine and 2 plastic cups. They sat on the ledge, legs dangling 3 stories above the alley. After a while, Emile said, very quietly, "I made you the scarf because I was trying to figure out how to tell you. I'm in love with you, and I was too chicken shit to use. You know, words." Julian's heart stopped, then restarted twice as fast. "I thought if I gave you something I made with my own hands, you might understand," Emile continued, staring hard at the label on the wine bottle like it held the rest of the explanation. "And then you wore it every single day, and I thought maybe you did understand, but I was still scared you'd leave if I said it out loud. Because you could get anyone, Julian. He gestured vaguely, as if the night air contained the list of all the ways Julian was wonderful. And I'm just the idiot who puts too much oregano in everything. Julian found his voice somewhere around his knees. You thought I could get anyone, so you decided to seduce me with knitwear? Emile finally looked at him, eyes wide and terrified and hopeful. Did it work? Julian kissed him. It was clumsy, too much wine, not enough practice. The ledge was narrow, and the drop was real, but it was also perfect. Emile tasted like cheap Merlot and relief. They didn't sleep that night. They talked until the sky went from black to pearl gray. About fear and family and how long each of them had been pretending not to feel this. Emile admitted he hadn't known he could feel this way about a man until Julian moved in, and suddenly every room felt brighter when he was in it. Julian admitted he'd been half in love with Emile since the first time Emile fell asleep on his shoulder during a documentary about the SEO, 1995 referendum. The months that followed were a slow, deliberate coming out to the world. First it was their friends McGill grad students are. It's a demographic difficult to shock. Then Emile's sisters, who responded by forming a group chat titled Finally and sending an onslaught of heart emojis. Julian's parents took longer. He drove home to Rimouski one weekend in June, hands shaking on the wheel the whole way. His mother cried, but not for the reasons he'd feared. She cried because she was sorry he'd carried it alone for so long. His father shook Emile's hand when they met in August and said only, "Take care of him, okay?" Which in their family was practically a ballad. They renewed the lease in July. Both their names on the new contract for the first time. Emile framed it and hung it in the hallway like it was art. In September, Emile defended his dissertation. Julian sat in the hallway outside the exam room wearing the charcoal scarf despite the heat. When Emile emerged, bleary-eyed and triumphant, Julian was waiting with a bottle of champagne and a new scarf Emile had secretly knitted for him. Deep green this time, the color of new leaves. That winter they went home together for Christmas. Emile's mother taught Julian how to make torture. Julian's father taught Emile how to drive in snow. On New Year's Eve, they stood on the same roof where everything had started and watched fireworks over the mountain. In March, on a day when the snow had turned to slush and the city smelled like possibility, Emile took Julian to the Atwater market under the pretense of buying maple syrup. Instead, he led him to the little pedestrian bridge over the Lachine Canal and got down on one knee in a puddle. Because Emile's sense of timing had always been imperfect, the ring was simple white gold with a thin line of engraved lines, the first two lines of Nelligan Sawyer, Diver, the poem Emile had been reading the night he realized he was in love. Julian Laurent, he said, voice cracking. Will you keep letting me knit you terrible sentimental garments for the rest of our lives? Julian cried so hard he nearly dropped the ring into the canal. They married the following autumn in the botanical gardens. On a day so crisp, the leaves sounded like applause when the wind moved through them. Julian wore the charcoal scarf as something old. Emile wore the green one as something new. Their friends read passages in Nelligan, obviously, but also Miron, and one very earnest urban planning metaphor. Julian had written about shared public space that made everyone cry anyway. At the reception, Julian's oldest friend raised a glass and said, "To the two idiots who took 2.5 years and one extremely persistent scarf to figure out what the rest of us saw at the first potluck." Later, when the music was loud and the wine had run out and their shoes were ruined from dancing on grass, Emile pulled Julian close and whispered against his ear. "I was blind for so long. I was invisible," Julian answered. "Not anymore," Emile said, and kissed him under strings of lights that looked like every small brave gesture they'd ever made. Finally shining all at once, the apartment in the plateau is still there. The radiator still hisses. The scarves there are many now live in a basket by the door. 2 names are on the lease, 2 toothbrushes in the bathroom. 2 lives no longer parallel but magnificently, messily, intentionally entwined. Some nights they still go up to the roof. Even though they bought a little house in Verdun last year with a garden, Emile insists on overplanting with herbs. They bring whatever Emile is knitting this time, and a bottle of something better than the 3 years ago cheap red, and they sit on the ledge where it all began, Julian leans his head on Emal's shoulder and thinks how strange and miraculous it is that a single quiet offering, one scarf on a chair on a cold January night, can unravel a whole life and then knit it into something stronger, warmer, and utterly visible. The city keeps glittering below them, loud and alive. Above them, the sky is wide open.